Hello scholars, welcome. Mr. Hinkle here, continuing our discussion on groundwater. In our introduction, we talked about the concept of groundwater, and now I would like to discuss the science of groundwater, and we'll call it how groundwater moves, groundwater flow. So our objective, provide an overview of how groundwater moves underneath the Earth's surface. Okay, so groundwater is water found underground. Groundwater, water in the ground, in soil, in sand, in cracks in the rock. It is stored and moves very slowly through the underlying geology. It's a wildly important source of fresh water and is found globally everywhere in varying depths and quantities. There's our brief review of what groundwater is. So let's get into processes. Here's the land surface. Here is a cloud. When it rains, the water lands on Earth's surface. You could also think of it like this. When you water your grass, where does the water go? Well, it goes into the ground, obviously. This is a geologic process called infiltration. So the water from the surface makes its way down into the subsurface via infiltration. Now, infiltration is determined, the infiltration rates, how much water and how fast can that water make its way down into the surface, by the amount, type, and intensity of precipitation. This is why in big rainstorms, sometimes it rains so hard and so fast that the water pools up on top of the ground. But then, by magic, it's not magic, it's infiltration, it makes its way into the ground. Vegetation can affect infiltration, gradient or slope, aspect, pre-existing antecedent moisture conditions. So a storm after a storm will make less moisture. Getting a little bit into the hydrology here, soil type, lots of factors to determine how fast and how much water makes its way into the subsurface. But once it does infiltrate, then we've got areas underneath the Earth's surface. Where did all my pens go? Oh, they're all here because I'm doing all these lectures and talking all this science. Great, love it. Okay, so it infiltrates down through the vadose zone, also known as the zone of aeration or the unsaturated zone. And then this has both water and air. Below the vadose zone is the zone of saturation, where there's no longer air in the soil or the rock. Now it is completely full of water. And we call the area, this red's not doing very good for us today. We call the level at which it transitions from both water and air to the zone of saturation the water table. Below the water table, Earth is completely saturated with water. Above the water table, it's not. And so understanding where the water table is important for knowing how much, how deep, and where to put wells. So how much water is available, how deep is the level of that groundwater, and how deep do you need to dig your well in order to access it. It rains. Water infiltrates through the vadose zone, fills up underneath the surface in the zone of saturation, and is stored in the rocks underneath the Earth. I guess I'm going to go to this one now, so I'm not just drawing crude pictures. Rains, water table, dashed line, unconfined aquifer. So this is a rock layer that is open to the surface of the Earth that infiltration connects to. Now, there's I haven't introduced that. There are layers through which the water cannot pass through, known as confining layers. And then there are deeper layers of rocks that can hold water. And the difference here is going to be an unconfined aquifer and a confined aquifer. So the key term here is aquifer. A body of rock that stores water underneath the surface. Good aquifers are sandstone sedimentary rocks. Good confining layers are crystalline rocks, igneous and metamorphic. And so aquifers need to have the characteristics of being both porous and permeable. Porous is going to be the spaces between all of the individual grains, and permeability is the ability for water to move through those spaces. Now, unsaturated or vadose zone, the water table, groundwater. We can see different types of geology, meaning the rock type or the geologic structures are going to allow for greater or less storage of water, which is one reason why the earth is unequally distributed with groundwater. It goes to the geology, always. How do we know that? The geology. Usually it's plate tectonics, and this time it's the rock cycle. So a good aquifer must be both porous and permeable. Let's put this on the board. Porous and permeable. Awesome. I don't have a tube, but imagine I have a tube and it's connected from one side to the other. It's full of water. Now, if I hold this tube here and I pick up the other side, the water rushes out of the side that's still low. You can imagine, we've done this at some point, right? You have a tube and then pull one side up and water pours out the other side. Well, what's going on here is a pressure gradient. There is a potentiometric surface representing the height that water would rise if the wells were penetrating pressurized aquifer systems or water systems. So this is the whole concept behind wells. Your water table is high in one place, you dig a well down to another place, and then that well can either be brought up naturally to a certain point, or it can automatically flow if your well comes above the potentiometric surface. So, I'm not sure if that made total sense, but let me try and clarify. Water in the mountains infiltrates. And here's our water table that mirrors or reflects the Earth's surface. Water table. So now, the pressurized surface is here. That means if you build a water tower here, and this digs a well into your groundwater, that well will automatically fill up because of the pressure gradient. And in this simplified version, we could understand that pressure gradients are going to dictate where water moves. And in fact, groundwater flow is determined by differences in pressure, because material wants to move from high pressure to low pressure. So we've got this in our groundwater systems. Aquifers, confined and unconfined, confining layers that are holding it in, and then wells that are dug, giving us certain things like springs, wells, artesian wells that always flow, and characteristics of the subsurface based on the shape of the landscape, the subsurface geology, and where the water is located. So hopefully I was able to clear that up just a little bit. Groundwater flow, let me summarize. Groundwater flow has to do with differences in pressure of the water underneath the surface. Okay, let's keep going. Where groundwater fills up is known as recharge. So in the summer, it rains, infiltration. In the winter, snow melts, infiltration. It is recharging, and this is the beginning of a groundwater flow path. Well, groundwater also makes its way to rivers. It makes its way to the ocean. It's part of the water cycle. And where groundwater actually, this is how rivers are full of water in the summertime when it's not raining. Why is there water in this river? It hasn't rained for months. Well, subsurface flow paths of groundwater is making its way to fill up a base level of that river. And we call this area discharge. Not exclusive. Discharge also happens in springs, artesian wells, on playas, but this would be called a gaining stream, the end of the groundwater flow path, where the groundwater is actually leaving the ground and emerging at the surface. So we've got key terms. Okay, we've got recharge increases groundwater, that should be G, and discharge decreases groundwater. So this one's just kind of fun, just to understand. Okay, so you go to Yellowstone, these geysers are shooting up steams of air. What the heck is going on? Where does that water come from? It comes from the ground. Hot springs. Well, we'd mentioned springs, but some springs are hot. What's going on there? Well, subsurface geology is the answer. We've got cracks in the ground that are close to nearby sources of heat, magma chambers. The magma heats up the water. That water, groundwater, discharges onto the surface, creating a hot spring. If that pressure builds up in underground caverns, it might build, and then eject. The ejection of the hot water and steam is known as a geyser. So hot springs, natural features by geologic processes. Heated groundwater that makes its way onto the surface creates a hot spring. Heated groundwater that accumulates and builds pressure and releases in steams of air, of water, is known as a geyser. So if you love hot springs, like I do, hanging out, soaking in these natural hot tubs, you can thank superheated groundwater for arriving at the surface. Okay, so that was a lot about groundwater flow. Groundwater infiltrates through the surface, through the vadose zone, filling up the zone of saturation. That transition area is the water table. And groundwater is going to be dependent on pressure differences because it moves. Where groundwater comes in, it's known as recharge. Infiltration is recharge. Where it makes its way back to its surface, the end of groundwater flow paths is known as discharge. What do I have here? It moves slowly underneath the surface of the earth, and it's a unique process that humans can utilize. We use groundwater for so much, and we can also enjoy it in the form of hot springs and geysers. Groundwater is amazing. It's a big topic. This is a nice little introduction. I hope you enjoyed learning about groundwater today, and I'll see you again.